Welcome to Godsplaining, Contemplative Preachers, Contemporary Age. Each week, join the Dominican friars as they consider all things Catholic.
Welcome back to Godsplaining. We're delighted to have you here on our second installment of Guestsplaining, which, in addition to being a strange way of putting two words together and making a small pun on our name, is also an opportunity to break open the conversation beyond the ordinary five friars who contribute for a variety of reasons. One, we're not that interesting. Two, we also get tired of each other. And three, you get tired of us. So as a way to add some leaven to the conversation, we've had guests now for a grand total of 2 months. So it's become a trend. So as to, again, break open that conversation and add some new insights and some new encouragement to for you, the audience, for you, the listener. So this week or this month, we're delighted to have Father Mike Schmitz joining us. So Father Mike, thanks so much for accepting the invitation. For our listeners, if you wouldn't mind just saying a word of introduction, where you're coming from, what you do, who you are, those types of things.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Also, my name is, as you mentioned, Father Mike Schmitz. I am a diocesan priest in Duluth, Minnesota, and I am the chaplain at the University of Minnesota Duluth. So I'm an on-campus chaplain, as well as the director of youth ministry for our diocese. For the last, I think the 16th or 17th year I've been in that position. And so it's kind of been, I think they just forgot about me and just said, keep doing whatever you're doing. Right now I am washed out because I'm looking out at this gorgeous snowfall that we had. We had a blizzard that last basically 24 hours, and it was insane. It was crazy on my drive to my parents' place. And so I am recording this or doing this having this conversation with you from my dad's house. And which explains the moose picture behind me and the wooden walls. And I don't know if anyone can see, but it's pretty awesome to be able to be here with you here, there.
It's rustic and it conveys a kind of classic sense of Minnesota. You have an excuse
Absolutely.
for looking like washed out and blanched. We, by comparison, don't have an excuse. We always look this bad, regardless of whether or not we're looking at snow, because we don't go outside. So congratulations for being normal.
You're always reading, you're always studying.
That's it. That's the
kind
hope.
of just kind of sitting inside, really kind of wasting time.
Woo!
So
there you go.
Great. Father Gregory, of course, didn't introduce me, but why would he? So it's great. Father Jacob Bertrand here too. So just so you know, the third verse that chimes in, if you're not watching, there's someone else here. It's not just it's some guy lurking in the background, but at least you know who it is. So I'm here too. Thanks, Father Gregory. It's great. And also, just for the record, the sort of having guests, because we get tired. I don't really get tired of listening to myself. So other people probably don't either, but it's good to have a guest nonetheless. It's great to have Father Mike with us. So it's a lot of fun. I just want the record to be clear, to be straight, nobody to be confused. So
thank you.
There you have it. Yeah.
Greatly appreciated. I take it all back as concerns you and attribute it twofold to myself.
Excellent.
So for this conversation,
Patrick,
probably. Okay. I suppose so. For this conversation, we thought that we would talk a little bit about the place of the body in our living of life, kind of in general, our living of our Catholic lives in particular. And I guess the way to maybe motivate the question or a way to introduce it would be to think in terms of like how much the body matters. So our culture's kind of two minds when it comes to this, because on the one hand, it seems like the body matters a lot because you hear a lot of things about, eating healthily and exercising and, things of that nature. But on the other hand, it seems like the body doesn't matter too terribly much because, people kind of do all kinds of wild things with their bodies without thinking too terribly much of it. Right. So people might have a variety of sexual partners in the course of the same month without really skipping a beat. Or you think in terms of transgenderism, you can change your body. Maybe that's indicating that it does matter. Maybe it's indicating that it doesn't. Hard to say. So maybe just to kind of get the conversation started, Father Mike, what would be your kind of approach to the question of does the body matter? And specifically in your conversations with the students whom you serve and minister to, how do you motivate this question for them, or how do you bring it into focus?
It's such a great question, because I think that as you noted, we don't necessarily have an agreement, or we don't even necessarily have an understanding of what the body is or the value of the body. One of the things that I found has been really helpful as a kind of a breakthrough point when it comes to talking with our students is we usually set up, especially when we're talking about like theology of the body, because that's when you have people who are asking the question, as opposed to just kind of stepping into someone's life and saying, by the way, here's something you should know about the body. But when people are maybe they're tired of what you're describing. They're tired of, okay, so the body is so important that it has to look like this or be like this, or it's so disposable that it doesn't even matter. But someone who's really trying to answer the question or find the answer to the question of like, so what is the role of the body in my life? What is God's vision for the body? And one of the things that one of the breakthrough kind of phrases or like teachings, I think, is just the kind of having maybe say even the beginnings of a solid anthropology, which would be, so what is a human person? What is a human being? Well, the human being is a body. So this is to say that you are your body. And for people to hear that, just kind of like it's something when they're open, right? When they're open to it, it's like, oh, wait. So even C.S. Lewis, with who I love very much, and he has taught me so many things. At one point, he says, you are not your body. You have a body. You are a soul. And I would disagree. I would say that no, you are a body and soul composite. Like that's what human beings are. And so just as, in some ways, just as highly as you value your soul, we would also value your body. And so that is like the first kind of step for people to kind of move forward. A lot of times is kind of a breakthrough or a breakthrough new understanding claim that they have to wrestle. The church has a pretty good grasp of a lot of the questions people would bring up. So for example, they'd say, well, yeah, but your soul is eternal or your soul is immortal. And I'd say, well, yes, but so I know that I don't want to misuse terms. So your soul is immortal. Yes, correct. Not eternal. He said, yes, but the body is destined for the resurrection and ultimately to be immortal. And so say this, or you'd even say John Paul II's very, very famous quote of the body and it alone has the ability to make visible what is invisible, the human and divine. That's saying the body, it alone has the ability to make visible the invisible. So what is the invisible reality? Well, your soul. What reveals that? What communicates that? Your body. And there's nothing else that you have that can communicate like the true you. And that's the thing is like when you get this, even the issue of like say transgenderism, you would say, but the real me is such and such. Well, yeah, but your body and it alone has the ability to reveal what's hidden and the real quote unquote real you. And though both those things have to line up. Anyways, I can go on and on, but that's the first step that I think a lot of times is helpful for people to realize like, no, you are a body and soul composite. That's what a human being is. And to not have those together, united in harmony is death. And yeah, that's a first step.
One of the, I think one of the first times I realized that distinction, or I don't know if it's a distinction, but the reality that you're talking about, Father Mike, is when I think it was here at the House of Studies, and Father Gregory, I think we took the class together, the Creation, the Human Person course, when our professor was talking about sort of running through a human anthropology and these kind of things. And one of the things that he pointed out, I think it was him, was that, you know, when a person is dead, when you have a dead body, that's not actually a person, it's a body.
Right.
And that, you know, a person in heaven before the second coming, we wouldn't properly call that a person because the soul and the body are separate. And that's not something that I've ever thought about. So like while we're living, of course, we're properly people because we are a body soul composite, as you were explaining. And then when we get our bodies back again at the second coming, we'll properly be people, a body soul composite yet again. And I think that's really kind of a big kind of point to remember, that like, what is the person? Who is the person? And that what we do, because we're so intimately connected, that what we do in our body affects our soul, and what we do with our soul, as it were, affects our body. They're not divisible sort of discrete entities. So I don't know what you think, Father Mike, but what have you, with respect to like people, you said that people who are open, they hear this and they're kind of like, whoa, that's a big deal. How do you think that changes, you know, people who are trying to grow deeper in their relationship with Christ, in their spiritual life? How do you think that should change, or how do you think that does change, like one's relation to the body? How should the body be approached then? How should it be treated if we're also trying to grow in our relationship with Christ, in a spiritual sense? The two can't be divorced. So what does that look like for the body then?
Yeah, no, I think that's a phenomenal question, because that is the next question. And I think that the next step would be, if I am my body, then what I do with my body matters. And again, like you said, not divorced from like but my interior reality is, my motivation is like, but no, if you are your body, then what you do with your body matters. And it's almost kind of a simple or simplistic, well, simple, I'll say, example would be, I remember hearing a preacher or a teacher say years ago, he was talking to like, hey, husbands out there. He said something along the lines of, if you claim that you love your wife, but if your calendar, your schedule doesn't have her in it, then how can she really know that you love her? Because she can see your calendar. She says, "Oh, I love her in my heart." Like, yeah, but she can see your calendar. She can't see your heart. Like, she can see your schedule. She can't see your heart. In so many ways, that's similar. You can make that translation or that the parallel to our relationship with the Lord, where we can say, oh no, I really love Jesus. Well, have you prayed recently? Have you like carved out time for him? Like, well, no, I mean, well, of course, in this case, God can see our heart, but we recognize that if just like, oh, I'm loving someone in my heart, it doesn't really mean anything unless I actually love them with my actions, then we'd say the same thing about a relationship with the Lord, or even with the body. So if I am my body, what I do with my body matters. And because of that, I have to ask the question, if someone were to merely see my actions, would they be able to say, that's a person who follows Christ? That's a person who is living justly. That's a person who's living uprightly. That's a person who cares about other people. Because again, like you had said, the what we do with our bodies actually affects our soul, and our soul needs to have an effect on our bodies and our actions. And so I think that once we see some of those things, I think one of the things this does is it begins to cut the line between body worship, or the cult of the body. As in St. John Paul II, again, he talked about this thing when he did the whole theology of the body. He was affirming the goodness, the dignity, the importance, the value of the body. But he also warned against this thing called the cult of the body, which would prize health, youth, fitness above all things, and to the exclusion of the soul, to the exclusion of that relationship with the Lord. And I think even to a distortion of the ultimate end of health. And I think that health in of itself, obviously, right, is a good, but maybe it's not the ultimate good, right? It's meant to bring us along the path towards the ultimate good.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you're talking, I'm thinking about the kind of logic that the Apostle John uses in his first letter, where he says, if I say I love my brother, right, but effectively don't in the body, then I'm a liar. It's interesting, like what you describe, it has big implications in terms of like faith and works, right? It's not that we believe that we're justified by works. It's that we believe that we're justified by faith, breathing forth love. And that love always has a bodily dimension. I guess kind of like where that takes my mind with regard to, like I'm thinking of your ministry in particular. Say you have a student who comes to you, maybe he was in a Bible study with a focused missionary, and now he's interested in getting more involved in his faith. And let's say that he has a kind of tendency towards activism. So he's not only is he signed up for this Bible study, but now he's in discipleship. He's doing, 50 things academically, but now he's doing 50 things extracurricularly. And he has this kind of tendency to be like, I don't know, like activist, I suppose, about his approach to the thing. What do you do to kind of instill something of a balance between body and soul, as it were, to kind of speak in the terms with which we introduce the question, but more broadly, like the invisible and the visible?
Yeah, that's a great question, I think, because so I keep going back to what you're describing. I keep going back to the book, The Soul of the Apostolate. So here's someone, the book, The Soul of the Apostolate, so good. I've never finished it. I've only read the first and second chapters like 20 times, because there's so much to chew on. There's so much to this. It keeps bringing me back to this place of like, oh yeah, that's right. Oh yeah. And what the whole, at least the first two chapters are, is a warning against activism, a warning against what he calls the heresy of good works, not like yours describing, which is like separating faith and works, but is the idea that the whole spiritual life is just about going out and doing good. And he says, no, actually, those works have to be not just informed, they have to be motivated by, they have to be sustained by a depth of relationship of abiding in the Lord. And so I really like these two terms because they're kind of physical terms, they're verbs, but abiding and striving. And to hold those two intentions. So here's one of the young men, or even the young women who will come to our Bible studies. We have a lot of kind of activists, both male and female. I feel like they're checking the boxes, and like, okay, that's fine. There's a certain motion, like striving. I even think about how biblical that is. That when the person comes to Jesus and says, "Are there many in heaven? Are many saved or not?" And Jesus says, wide is the road that leads to hell and narrow the road that leads to heaven. But then he says, but you strive. And then that's so key. Like, we have to be striving. Jesus says, strive. At the same time, all throughout John's gospel, he uses that menain and the abide in me or remain in me as well. And so we can't have real striving, true striving, unless we're first and continually abiding. And so one of the things that I'll have to continually invite our students to is that the returning to the Lord and sitting in his presence, being in his presence, entering into that meditative prayer. In fact, we have a deacon, he lives right across the campus from us. And so he's retired. And so he selected himself to be our deacon. He just kind of comes over and helps with everything. What I mean by that is he doesn't help assist in the liturgies at all because he has an assignment at parishes. He just comes over, and if things are broken, he'll fix them. If things need cleaning, he'll like, hey, we need to get somebody on this, and he'll recruit people. And one of the things he's pointed out, he says, Father, you have a really great Mary ministry here. We need to start a Martha ministry because we have a lot of students who pray regularly, and they are in the Lord's presence, like they're committed to prayer, crazy. It's a Mary ministry. He's like, we really, really need to have a Martha ministry because his issue, that he notices, is we need to translate that abiding into like striving and into service. And so I'm like, oh yeah, it can go both ways. It can cut both ways really easily.
Yeah, no, that's a great and sobering point for those of us who I think may sometimes emphasize a disposition of waiting on the grace of God that never actually eventuates in action. But before we get to the work of self-accusation, well, we'll never get to that work. We're gonna take a short break here, and then we'll come back to wind up the discussion.
This is Godsplaining. Get up to date on all our latest episodes at opeast.org/Godsplaining.
And we're back. So thanks so much for joining us here for this episode of Godsplaining. We're delighted to have Father Mike Schmitz joining us from the frozen tundra of Minnesota. So having braved a blizzard and the attack of a moose over his right shoulder, he now is here with us in this conversation, and we're delighted to have him. I guess for another topic, a small thought that kind of emerges from some of the things that we've teased out in the first half of the episode is I want to kind of think about recklessness in the spiritual life and maybe what the body has to do with that. What do I mean? Okay, I'm thinking of a passage from G.K. Chesterton where he talks about, it's like his reading of this passage in scripture, you have to lose your life to save it. And he says, like a soldier has to be willing to come within a hair's breadth of death in order to, carry out his mission. He has to, in a certain sense, be reckless. We would say he has to be courageous, but sometimes courage or bravery looks a lot like recklessness because it takes that, kind of mustering that moral energy to overcome cowardice. Now, I think that working with young people, you probably, work with folks who are a little more inclined to recklessness than your average elderly type. So I don't know for how long, summer lasts in Minnesota, but, if they're jumping off train bridges, if you're doing rope swings, if they're skydiving, Rocky Mountain climbing, spending 2.7 seconds on a bull named Fu Manchu, all the above, right? What are the ways that we should think about undertaking risk or kind of encouraging or moderating a spirit of recklessness in the body? Because we don't want to be timid in body. We don't want to be timid in soul, but we also want to take care of our body. So, maybe tease some of that out, or if you could comment on some of that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. That's such a yes. One of the things that I found more than anything is with a particular generation, maybe a particular two generations that I've been working with on campus, because the iteration of the millennial generation, which again is just broad strokes, and so when we just name that, it's kind of like, okay, you're throwing this out. With iGen or Gen Z or whatever you want to call the current generation on campuses, is maybe less of a recklessness in the ways you're describing. We have had like the jumping off train bridges. We have had those people who are like, yeah, I went to Spain, did the bull run. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's so cool. Because it's so rare right now. What I found is it's incredibly rare. Now, I also go to the internet, and there are some incredible Twitter pages that have there's one called Hold My Ale. And it's the idea is like, hold my beer while I do this stupid thing. And it's awesome. It's so hilarious. But there's people taking those risks you're talking about, which is like this recklessness, this disregard for the body that I think, why in the world would you do this? But what I've found is at least our students or our young people, they have to be more encouraged to risk, not necessarily risk bodily harm, but that risk muscle, as far as no, there's no guarantee when it comes to life, and there's no guarantee when it comes to success, and there's no guarantee when it comes to your next step or even following the Lord. And so the risk muscle, I think, is in some ways atrophied in a lot of the people that I'll encounter, a particular generation. At the same time, there could be a tendency towards wisdom as well. That sense of like, I don't need to unnecessarily put myself at risk because I'm kind of growing. I might have a certain element of foresight that others maybe on this webpage don't. But what I've seen maybe a little bit less of that, like that kind of that recklessness when it comes to I'll put myself in physical harm or physical danger. But I have seen a tendency towards timidity when it comes to choices, when it comes to decisions, when it comes to asking people out. Like, oh my gosh, how many times I'll have to say, no, gentlemen, just go ahead. If you think she likes you, ask her out, just like take that step. Yeah, but what if she says whatever? Like, okay. So I don't know if that answers a response to your question. I think I don't necessarily see a lot of the recklessness. I would like to see some more of it, but at the same time, I don't mind when they're not saying, let me jump over that bonfire. I'm like, yeah, that's okay. You don't need to do that now.
One of the the kind of list that Father Gregory mentioned, I don't know what song that was. I know the song, but about that bowl, that was kind of lame, but that's all right. He did it. We don't edit, so
Yeah.
it'll stay in the episode.
Great.
So those things were, I mean, he was kind of referring to the more, I don't know, not extreme, but sometimes more extreme things of that are, I guess, perhaps bigger life questions, or even if it's asking a girl on a date or a gentleman on a date, those are bigger questions than kind of just perhaps the day-to-day. But even in the sort of day-to-day care of the body, Father Mike, what do you think is like an appropriate relationship to, like, I guess, as in now we're so like health conscious, and we're so worried about like the food that we're eating, whether it's organic or non-GMO, or like the little microbeads we're putting in the water from like using a face wash, or like how much we exercise. I forgot, I was trying to remember where I heard it, but it was either a book that I was reading or something that I was listening to, that like it was a Christian speaker, and saying that like the way in which we exercise, even just to maintain the body, reflects, as you were saying earlier with like the calendar schedule thing, actually reflects what we think about our body, and could even reflect our, what we think about our relationship with Christ, how we approach these just kind of routine daily things. So I guess the virtue is always in the mean, but if you could flesh that out, what that looks like, what that should look like, what's an appropriate relationship with the day-to-day bodily care. I think that's important to consider too.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. In fact, right after our interview, my family, I mentioned I'm in my hometown. And so all my siblings and all my nieces and nephews are going over to one of our siblings' houses to do a workout together, because this is what we do kind of when it comes to holidays, when it comes to like when we get together, like we work out together.
Something that would never happen in one of our Dominican houses. We would never exercise together. That's awesome though. That's very cool.
But there's an element there where, like you said, there's some virtue. At the same time, evil is good that's distorted or misused or abused, or and so or the absence of they're good. And so one of the things that I've had to wrestle with, because as I mentioned maybe in other contexts, my parents have always, when I was growing up, they were always doing marathons, or they're always doing ski marathons or doing triathlons. And so it was just kind of a normal thing. The question was never, did you work out today? The question was, what'd you do today? Like how did you exercise today? And so we just came from a culture of like, this is just normal way to like stay fit and whatever. So there's, I would say, kind of a balance in just saying this is a normal thing to do because you have a body and because it's something that is good for maintenance or even good for competition or good for kind of improving oneself. At the same time, as a Christian, I have to stop and ask, okay, how has the body been seen throughout over the course of the years? And the recognition, it seems to me to be the goodness of the body is not only that, okay, you are your body, but it is in some ways utility. No, not entirely utility, but there's a sense of like, how can I put myself at the service of the Lord? Like, how can my body be at the service of loving God, loving neighbor? And so health, having that end being, okay, I can use this now for love of God and love of neighbor. And so once that turns in on oneself, and it's simply, again, that distortion of like health being an opportunity to serve. No, health is just an opportunity for me to be more self-involved. I would say, oh my gosh, there's been a distortion here. Even, St. Francis of Assisi, the founder of the Franciscans, I don't know if you knew that, but he what did he call his body? He called his body brother ass. And that sense of not demeaning it, but in the sense of saying, no, its proper place in many ways is for service. Its proper place is the health of one's body is oriented towards service. And so is lack of health, right? So what I mean by that is here's someone whose body is it's breaking down, or when my body is, I experience chronic pain, or I experience this thing that I can't get rid of, and there's some suffering involved. Like, okay, how can I use this suffering for the service of God or love of God and service of my neighbor? Like that sense of like, whereas health is hopefully oriented towards that outward expression, outward giving, even suffering in the body can be the same direction. It can be oriented towards that same like service. And so when when we look at the world around us, and we say, okay, there seems to be kind of like, again, a cult of the body that on at first glance exalt the body, lifts it up, and like, but for its own sake, as opposed to for a greater purpose. And I think we can do it with work, right? We can do that with any other good, we can do it with family. We can do that with any even ministry can be like, but there's an end beyond this thing, that it's good in of itself, but not the ultimate good in and of itself. And even not even the highest or higher, there are higher goods.
Yeah, I really like that distinction between, oh, sorry, Father. I really like that distinction between asking like, is what I'm doing with my body serving? Is that oriented towards serving, towards worship of God, towards praising God and serving others? Or is it kind of self-involvement? Is it something that turns what I'm doing just into myself? It's just self-focused. And I think that's a really helpful kind of metric to measure up against. So I like that a lot.
Well, I appreciate that, because I think that there's at the same time, obviously, there's going to be, like, I do this because it's enjoyable as well. Like I like playing. Like I think some of you are, or both of you maybe, were athletes in that sense of like playing basketball. I like doing these things. There's a certain element to it. But I would say this. I would say that I know one of my thoughts in preparing for today's conversation. One of the wounds I see that happens with so many of our young people and old people is when it comes to the cult of the body that gets distorted. So many like eating disorders, and so much even that term like body shaming, or even just kind of people. I found so many people with a loathing for their own bodies. And in that, like one of the elements that becomes destructive is so here's an example. I remember speaking with a young woman who she was talking about how when she was a Division I gymnast, and this is before she now has been graduated. And one of the things that she had done was she said, yeah, when I was a gymnast, I was like this body fat and this level of eating and this level of whatever, and that's the ideal. I looked like you should look as a gymnast. And now I'm not a Division I gymnast anymore. I'm past college, and just kind of like the sense of like, again, dislike of her own body and a even self-loathing kind of a situation. And one of the things that in the course of our conversation was going back to functionality, going back to utility, and saying, okay, so when you were a gymnast, why would you want to have this kind of body? Well, because that kind of body translates into good gymnastics. Like that kind of body means you can do the things that gymnasts can do at the level you're at, which is massively high. And then the question I have to ask is, okay, now you're no longer a gymnast, therefore you no longer need a gymnast body because it serves a function. And so what are you now? Like, well, I want to be able to, and she was able to articulate, like, I'd love to be able to be a mom. Like, I'd love to be able to be a healthy woman in the world who does X, Y, and Z. Okay, then your vision then of the perfect quote unquote body, ideal body, looks like this, gymnast. But that's only because when you were, that was the ideal body for gymnasts. Now you get to actually reorient this. And I think one of the things that has hurt so many of our young people is, with media, social media, all these things, is here is the quote unquote ideal body. And whoever is flipping through their Instagram or flipping through the whatever and saying, okay, that's the ideal. You have to ask the question, for what? Like, for what purpose? I just like that look like that. But wait, but that's not how you're made. And so what would your quote unquote ideal body be? Is, well, how do I answer that? What do you want to do with your body? I want to be able to serve the people around me, or I want to be able to run a marathon, or whatever the thing is, right? So that sense of like, it gets away from both exaltation of the body as well as denigration of the body, I think, because it's like, no, but the proper purpose of the body is to be able to make visible the invisible, and is to love God and serve others. So does that make sense? I think I when talking with some people about that, it's actually even helped, not actually, but it's helped me as well. Because I mean, I don't think that, I would say that I'm not immune from the same kind of thing of like, oh, I would like to be X, Y, or Z. And like, wait, I have to pause and say, to what end? Is this just for my own self-satisfaction, for my own kind of vanity, or is this for a purpose so that I can accomplish what God wants me to accomplish, loving Him and serving others?
Yeah, and I think the example that you give of St. Francis of Assisi and referring to his body as brother ass, with this idea of utility, you think of, St. Francis of Assisi kind of broke his body down for the glory of God, and I think it's described that he had his brothers lay him out naked on the ground, and at the point, like by the end of his life, he had been crying so many tears in penitence that he had gone blind. And it's just a broken man at the end of his days. Yeah. But like, again, to think of a Chesterton quote, he has eyes like kind of lit up, right? The wild eyes of a witness, because he's seen something and his body has been used as it were, right? For that end. He was very cognizant of the end. I'm very encouraged by that. That for me is very clarifying and helpful. And I suspect that our listeners will find it very much so as well. We're actually winding up here. So thank you so much for having joined us, made the time while visiting your family. We're very grateful for that.
My honor.
Maybe it's just a last thing. Is there any way in which our listeners can support you, support your mission, support your students with prayers or gifts or anything of that sort?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, as I said, it's my honor to be able to join the both of you today. As well as I have been so personally helped by Aquinas 101. That YouTube channel, so good, as well as the rest of the resources you all put out is just, it's phenomenal. So thank you for that. Secondly, I don't know if people want, we have a couple things. We have a podcast that is like weekly podcast on iTunes and all the other places. That's UMD Newman right now. It's all it is. UMD as in University of Minnesota Duluth Newman. It's weekly homilies, and then we have, of course, Ascension Presents, which is a YouTube thing, as well as starting very soon, January 1st, is a Bible in a Year podcast. So I'll be reading through the entire RSV Second Catholic Edition, according to the Great Adventure Bible Timeline. So if you're familiar with Jeff Cavins, he has this Great Adventure Bible Timeline where he divides the Salvation history into 14 or 12 periods over 14 narrative books. And so we go through all 73 books, but we follow the narrative itself, and then have those other non-narrative books like in their context. So I'm super excited about this. And if someone is like, I'm listening to this after January 1st, like it's not time stamped. It's just day 1 through day 365. And you can put it on double speed if you want. You can get through it really quick. But that's kind of the new initiative that I just had in my heart to, I'm like, I need to have a more biblical worldview, and I want to share that with other people. And so I proposed this to Ascension, and they were like, yeah, that's what we want to. And so we're kicking that off with the new year.
That's awesome. That sounds fantastic. So thanks so much again for having joined us. Thanks to our listeners for having tuned in. Please do share the podcast, like it, write a review, so that way it gets promoted in something that has been described to me as an algorithm. So it's like the easiest way to evangelize is to write something about this podcast so that other people see it with greater frequency. Again, no idea how it works, but I trust that those who have told me so can be relied upon. So we'll look forward to chatting with you again next time on Godsplaining. Thanks so much, and God bless.
Thanks for listening to Godsplaining, a work of the Dominican Friars of the province of St. Joseph. Visit us at opeast.org.